We're tracking two storms as we head into the weekend. It'll start to be felt first this coming weekend across the Pacific Northwest and the Rockies, and this looks like a significant storm that could impact the plains as it moves east, maybe parts of the Midwest. There's going to be two storms. This is the first one that's going to track, I think, across the Great Lakes. We're seeing more consensus with that. And the second one, there's a lot of questions about this one. You really have to get the first one done before you get an idea of where the second one's going. But I want to talk about the idea of where this storm may be headed and the kind of pattern that we're in, because that's just the European. The GFS is showing a much different solution. When you're looking out this far, I like to look at the ensembles. This particular map shows the possibility of more than 1 inch of snow falling all the way through Sunday the 12th. And look how far south this 20 to 30% chance of is across parts of middle Georgia, even parts of the Carolinas. You're going to see fluctuations in the models. I'm not going to hug every single operational run. You'll find that here if you're brand new to the channel. A lot of you are. Over 1,000 of you subscribed yesterday. The numbers continue to fly up. Thank you so much for coming over. If you are brand new, if you're a brand new subscriber, I'm Travis. I used to be a chief meteorologist on television years ago. I've been out of that business for years, but I find myself looking at this stuff on a consistent basis, so I started making YouTube videos about it. So if you think you'd like that kind of content, please subscribe, come back, and let's track the weather together. Now, yesterday, really the night before last, we were showing on the European an extreme historic cold outbreak. I still think we turn cold. I'm not trying to cherry pick a model, but my point is you have to start paying attention when you see the model starting to show this much cold air. We're definitely turning colder here across the northern plains and the upper Midwest as we head toward this coming weekend. That would be ahead of our storm. That's going to drop some snow, I think, in this area. And you can kind of see how that would wind up here. On the right side of that, we're going to see some warm air. Behind it, cold air surging in from the northwest, and then it turns chilly all the way to the Gulf Coast. And now you've pushed what we call your baroclinic zone, that difference between temperatures in the 50s and 60s versus the 20s and 30s, all the way to the Gulf Coast. So with this temperature difference, all you have to have is a piece of energy moving out of the Rockies or even Mexico, at that case, if the subtropical jet gets involved, which I don't know that it does. More than likely, your energy is going to come from this direction. You get that vorticity moving right over this baroclinic zone, and that's all it really takes to start developing surface low pressure. You start to blow a storm up, and I think some of the models are starting to pick up on that idea. Across the east, temperatures this week will be on the way down. I hinted at that a little bit. Still mild, though, across the south as we head into Monday afternoon. The northeast starts to cool down, and then out ahead of this next system, we'll squeeze a little bit of warm air north. Some snow on the northern side of this. It doesn't look like a huge snowmaker, but there could be some accumulation, and then we turn cold. And that cold air starts to push in as we head into the weekend. And then by the time we get into next week, that's when we really start to see the coldest of air, I think, somewhere around the 5th, 6th, and 7th. My idea on this is still unchanged. I think this could be some pretty cold air. The question is, do you end up with snow this far south? And I think that's why the European is picking up on temperatures in the teens below zero here in the North Carolina mountains. And something that I constantly think about, I think just after Helene just devastated the mountains of western North Carolina here, you've got a lot of people here that are still living in temporary housing. And when you get temperatures that are 10, 20 below zero, and listen, I don't know if it's going to get that cold, but if it stands a chance, it would be here in the North Carolina mountains where you get up in elevation. You've got a better chance of seeing snow. Not a good situation. So remember to say a prayer for our friends in western North Carolina who are still cleaning up after a hurricane. Really, it was a tropical storm as it moved through, but nonetheless, it devastated that region. Here are the drivers in the upper levels as we take a look at what we're seeing over the next couple of days. Your negatively tilted trough swings to the east. That's what's caused all the severe weather on Sunday. It caused the severe weather yesterday on Saturday. That moves offshore, at least the severe threat does, and now we turn cold here. And a little colder, too, here across the northern Rockies with some light snow. And some of that snow, actually, I say light, could be heavy, especially into some of the mountains. That moves to the east as we head toward Tuesday and Wednesday, and then we start to see our upper level pattern start to shift up. You've got more of a trough starting to dig out in the east, and look at this, a chunk of the polar vortex dropping south, turning cold across the east with a broad northwest flow. And now you've got these impulses of energy in the upper levels, right? So here's your long wave pattern. All it takes is this energy right in here along that baroclinic zone that I've talked about along the Gulf Coast, and now you've got an East Coast snowstorm. All right, here's what we're looking at over the next 24 hours or so, heading through Sunday night. Some snow up here into the Great Lakes. I want to compare the big global models too and talk about some of those players. As we head into Monday, we're dry here across the southeast from Arkansas all the way to the Carolinas. Some much-needed dry weather here after a very wild weekend with severe weather, tornadoes, severe thunderstorms, a lot of damage in many areas that saw that severe weather. So a bit of a break here, and now we're watching low pressure moving through the Ohio Valley. That's going to bring rain from Indianapolis over to Columbus, also a good chunk of Illinois. On the northern side of that, there could be a little bit of snow heading into Tuesday, and then that moves east, and we start to turn relatively cold behind that with some lake effect snow starting to pick up too, also some snow down into the Appalachians and into the mountains of the Northeast. More snow across the Pacific Northwest with our next system that's moving in Wednesday, and then here comes that energy as we move into Thursday and Friday. That will first be felt across the Pacific Northwest. That will drop into the Plain States and likely form our first storm. We're cold in the east. We've got northwest flow here. Lake effect snow continuing to go here downwind of the lakes. Some of that could be heavy at times. Some places could see quite a bit of snow too, especially over the coming weeks as we get reinforcing shots of cold air. Out ahead of our next low that moves out of the Rockies, we get Gulf moisture moving north into this cold air. So now the potential for heavy snow is on the table as we head into Friday and Saturday for the Rockies, then moving east of the mountains into parts of Nebraska, South Dakota, and then into Iowa and northern Missouri. Now, the exact placement of this will be very critical. We're looking now at next Sunday. It's not that far out now. We're not talking about 2 weeks away, and there's starting to be some consensus that something will form in this region, and I'll show you that comparison in just a moment. But the overnight GFS has this thing a little bit further south than the European, which I will tell you is a good 200 miles to the north. It's mixed precipitation on the GFS here, and I'm not going to dig into these details because I want you to see the idea of this storm track as it moves closer to the Great Lakes. It starts to curve back to the north and east. This actually makes sense. I think this is going to happen, and then your cold air really builds in behind this, pushing all the way down into Texas. The European, just to compare that, I'll go through the weekend into next week. Now we're looking at that long wave energy starting to move into the Pacific Northwest with our next storm. Once that moves east of the mountains, what happens is you get here and you develop what's called a lee side low. As that air expands, you start to develop low pressure, it stretches, and now we've got our storm forming here out into the plains. Notice the European is a little bit further to the north. If you were watching exactly where you lived just a moment ago, you may be dealing with sleet now, you may be dealing with just rain, or maybe even you stayed snow, especially the further north you go. There's still a lot of questions. I don't know that the question is whether or not we'll see a storm. It's exactly where will it be. That's something that is going to be fine-tuned this week. The comments always get crazy when you start talking about these winter storms, and they say, oh, so we don't know what it's going to do here or there. Well, look, the idea that we're seeing a winter storm is impressive at this point, and to me, it's looking significant. And I think if you just go deterministic, yes, it will snow, no, it won't snow a week out, that's not a smart thing to do. I think it's good to look at this cautiously and go, let's pay attention to this closely as we head into next weekend. And then beyond this is where some folks just get a little bit off the rail. And some people say we're talking about fantasy storms, and we very well could be. But I do want to tell you, look at all these H's. Boom, 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 boom. You've got Arctic high pressure building into the country. You're cold. You've set the stage. All the players are there. Now where do you see the snow? The European clearly is much colder than the GFS, and it's suppressed all that cold air south along the Gulf. One would argue it may be suppressing it too much, but the European tries to develop a low in the Gulf, putting snow into the deep south. Do I believe this? Not just yet. If I go back and look at yesterday's run, it didn't really do much of anything. It really suppressed this. Again, it's one of the reasons I like to look at the ensembles, the averages. What are we seeing? You know, these deterministic model runs will flip-flop back and forth, and if you follow any specific one, especially over a week out, you're going to be sorely disappointed. And some people look at this and go, you said it was going to snow in D.C. I'm not saying that because, I mean, come on, guys. One run ago, or really yesterday's run, had nothing. But the idea that we're seeing it is here. I think there's two distinct storms. My mind's not going to change about that. However, the second one may be out to sea. Confidence is definitely starting to grow, though, on this first one that's moving through the Central Plains and the Great Lakes. A closer look at some of the weather as we head through the rest of Sunday into Monday. There's that rain to snow across Michigan. Rain showers moving through the northeast, some gusty winds possible with these. We've dealt with the severe weather today. It'll still continue through the evening hours. And then there's that next weak system that starts to move through the Ohio Valley that could bring our next round of rain and snow here. And then we turn cold behind it with some lake effect snow starting to kick up. That rain to snow as we head into overnight into early Monday could accumulate here into parts of Michigan, especially once you get away from the lake where it's a little bit colder, a couple of inches possible. This is not a big snowstorm by any stretch. But that next system that moves in as we head towards Saturday and Sunday, some of the models are showing this. This is an idea of what the European is putting out. You can see that some areas, a good swath of more than 6 inches of snow, but pop over to the GFS. Right? If you're in Michigan or Wisconsin, you went, oh man, it just shifted further to the south, and you're celebrating if you're wanting snow across central Indiana, central Illinois. So there's a long way to go before we get there. Again, the consensus though is somewhere in this region there's going to be a snowstorm. I don't know, that's pretty broad, right? I think in this area. I think you even watch further to the south because your trend could be further south. The further north this first storm is, the better chance I think of that second coastal storm too. Because I think if this storm comes further to the south and you get an East Coast snowstorm, it's very hard to get 2 East Coast snowstorms back to back. All right, again, your chances for seeing over 6 inches of snow through this first storm, you can see you're starting to increase that here in this area. Now, this is lake effect up here, all right? So don't pay much attention to that, but I want to outline right in here. You can sort of see this teal color. That's a 20 to 30% chance, and you're really increasing those odds here across parts of Iowa, also here into northern Indiana and Ohio, and I would argue even parts of Michigan too. This is the European ensembles, which uses an average of a bunch of different models. Further to the west, across the plains, relatively quiet through Sunday and Monday, much quieter across Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama, where we saw all that severe weather. We're also quiet in most of Kansas and Oklahoma, although there could be a few rain and snow showers here as that system to your north moves through with some rain and snow across parts of Nebraska, even parts of South Dakota. Thursday and Friday, high pressure keeping us mostly dry. So a weak system may bring a little bit of snow here across Iowa, northern parts of Missouri, as we head into Wednesday and Thursday, but that moves east pretty quickly. It could also put some snow into the Ohio Valley, into the Appalachians. But here comes your big lee side low developing out ahead of this trough that swings through in the upper levels, surface low pressure developing east of the Rockies, and boom, there goes your storm as your low pressure develops even deeper here across Texas and Oklahoma. If you were to believe the European, which again, I'm not so sure I do, it's got your heavy snow going pretty much this way. Let's wait and see. Across the west, heavy rain and snow continues here tonight into Monday. Some of that snow starts to move into the Intermountain West. Snow will pile up on the order of feet into the mountains of Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming. A bit of a break, though, as we head through Wednesday, but by Thursday and Friday, more rain and snow here. Along the west coast, not as cold. Most of that Arctic high, again, pushing this way, not necessarily down across the mountains. These mountains usually protect us, especially right here along the front face of the Rockies, as a lot of that cold air just slides down through the eastern part of Alberta into Manitoba, down into the northern parts of Montana and South Dakota, North Dakota. That looks to be the case this week too. And then there comes our big storm as we head into Friday and Saturday that will move east. It's going to bring heavy rain and snow first to the Pacific Northwest, into the Intermountain West, the Northern Rockies, and then boom, out into the plains. Here's your snow through Tuesday. Again, the heaviest in the mountains, a couple of feet. And then as we push this out all the way through next weekend, into the Cascades, we could see 2-3 feet of snow into the mountains of Idaho and Wyoming. Heavy snow here expected as well through the week.